it took me a couple like walks to myself to really realize like what I had this entire time was imposter syndrome and this feeling of not having done enough. How does one overcome that?
Well, the number one thing is reps. The more work you put in towards it, the more time you put in towards something, the more confident the mind becomes. Because first of all, I don't know if you ever heard this quote, but confidence is success remembered. And confidence is generally the opposite of imposter syndrome, or imposter syndrome is at least a form of underconfidence. It's not actually that you're incapable of performing whatever you're doing. You're associating your success with some kind of metric or something else. There's certain things that are out of your control that shouldn't be your direction.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself a favor and give us a follow. I would hate for you guys to have FOMO on all the amazing guests that I'm bringing on this year. Without further ado, let's get right into this interview. Bob, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to connect with you yet, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Awesome. Bob Depasquale. I founded a wealth management firm. I focus on generosity, and I believe it's the most powerful force in the world. And if you're a giving person, more comes back to you than you'll ever expect.
And I love that, man. Right straight into the point. So, Bob, let me take you into the time machine really quickly. What was little Bob like? What was it like growing up in your childhood? What was the topics of money, finance, entrepreneurship? What was it like growing up in your household?
Well, growing up in my household was kind of cool. I was the only child. My parents, they always said they gave up after me. They had one kid and they were like, all right, that's enough of them. So I don't know how good of a start that was, but no, I was a good kid and had a great life. Both my parents were loving people, and I got a good chance to get to know them when I was young because I was an only child. And if I wanted to make friends, I had to go out and make them, man. So I learned at an early age that if you wanted to have a good time, you want to spend time with people, you got to go out and make time. You got to go talk to people. You got to pick up the phone. I mean, I was on the phones when I was a kid. You might be looking for a sales job someday. They're going to tell you get on the phone, or maybe these days it's get on the computer or get in those DMs. But I was on the phone. I had to say, hey, you want to hang out? You want to do something? Let's go somewhere. Because otherwise I was sitting at home playing with some Transformers or something. So I had, or some Tecmo Bowl on the video games. But when it comes to money and finance, that was an important part of my life when I was younger because my mom worked in a bank, and I learned a lot about basic concepts of saving, not a lot of high level investment stuff, but just basic concepts of interest, saving, how a bank account works. And that was so important to me because as I got older, although I didn't have a whole bunch of money, I knew how it worked, so that when I got a job and I started making money, I knew how to make wise decisions with my finances. And what I found is that the earlier you learn those lessons, the better you are, because it's proven that the young mind develops habits faster than an adult. So if you develop good habits from a young age, it's a lot easier to carry them out as you get older.
Yeah, 100%. And it's one of those things where I had to learn via books. I was very blessed and fortunate to have a pandemic where I had nothing but extra free time. And so I started looking into some of these concepts. And my first book was Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that's how I eased into this entrepreneurship finance thing. But it's one of those things where if it's not talked about in the household, it can be very difficult to get into because it's not something that we know we need to get into until we're on the opposite side of things where it's like we're probably like completely screwed when it comes to finances. Then it's like, oh, maybe I should have looked into this stuff. So Bob, let me ask you, a lot of times when people have a purpose or a passion or something that really pulls at their heart that they feel that it's their duty to kind of share with the world, it's usually something that, or sometimes it could be something that they lacked as a kid. So let me ask you, this idea of gratitude and generosity and giving back, was it something that was in abundance in your household, or was it something that was in the absence of in your household, and now you feel empowered to help other people learn about it because it's something that you were lacking? Which side of the fence was it on?
Yeah, so I got two stories for you if we have enough time. The first one is directly related to what we were just talking about, but it's also part of the gratitude piece too. So when I was getting ready for high school, there's a local high school, actually not local, out of town, about 20 miles or so from where I live. And I was if I would have stayed in town and went to the public high school here, it would have been fine. But my parents wanted me to get a private school education. They had some sports there that I wanted to play. They were well known for coaching up their players, but we couldn't afford to go to this school. So my mom came up with this creative financing way of basically borrowing some money from an account that she had already at the bank. And she knew that the discount on paying the upfront cost of the tuition for the school was larger than the interest rate that she'd have to pay against herself to borrow this money from the bank. Now, I don't want to get into too much technical stuff here, but essentially, we didn't have a lot. And it looked like I wasn't going to be able to go to this school. But when we figured out we had enough, we just had to figure out a way to use it right. And my mom always said she was grateful of her knowledge and what she learned at the bank to be able to do that, or else I wouldn't have been able to get this education. My life would have went in a completely different road. I'm not saying it would have been bad, but it would have went in a different direction. And so sometimes we don't even realize the stuff that we have. So when I grew up, like I said, I was an only child. So believe me, I was spoiled. I got most of the things that I needed, but we weren't extravagant. And so I learned to be thankful for the stuff that I did have, because I knew, I had some friends in the neighborhood, their parents did really well. Occasionally they'd get a big gift or they'd go on a nice trip, but they were always bickering and arguing with each other. Like the brothers and sisters were always saying, hey, he got this for the birthday. I want to sit in the front seat. I want to sit in the back. Like they were always arguing over stuff, like petty stuff. And I would just sit there and be like, you know what? You're in the car. Like you're at least there. Like you got an opportunity to go somewhere. So gratitude is really important. So I sat on this side of the table, if you will, of expressing gratitude for things. And I used to remember my parents saying stuff like, by like, we try really hard. Like we both work full-time jobs. We work really hard to be able to put food on a table, and we don't always get the fanciest stuff, but we want you to know that we care for you and we love you, and we feel like we're doing a pretty good job. And I always remember them saying that. That was really important. So that's the first story that reminded me, sometimes we don't even realize the lengths that the stuff that we have can go to. Like you might be sitting and comparing yourself. Like one of the worst things you can do is compare yourself to people who are 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of you on a journey, or on a completely different journey. That's probably even worse. What you should do is compare yourself to the things that you used to do, and hopefully you're improving. And I learned that in spades from my parents. So that's number one. And I got another longer story that I'd tell you really about the generosity piece, if you want to hear all the details. But really, there was a point in my life where I thought I was invincible. Like when I was 18, I don't know about anyone out there who's 18, but you feel like I got my whole life ahead of me. What could possibly go wrong? And in a matter of a few days, my whole life got flipped, turned upside down. And I realized that, first of all, life itself is a blessing. Like you should be grateful just to be alive. And number two, there's a lot of people out there in the world that have this desire to do really nice, generous, good things. And if you don't accept those things and you don't realize that, then you're probably missing a lot. You're missing a lot of opportunities. And you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to go into business, you want to be a leader in your community, you got to take advantage of those opportunities and network with the people who have a giving mindset.
Yeah, no, I love both of those stories, man. And to touch on the first one, you mentioned too about, you mentioned something about you comparing people's chapter 1s to their, chapter 25, right? And literally one of the guys that had hopped on the podcast twice now, his name is Brandon. And I was interviewing him today on Instagram Live because he has a big personal development conference, and literally next week from the time we're recording this. So by the time this drops, it'll long pass. But he was telling me like, yeah, John, a lot of people compare, my journey with where they're at, and they don't realize that I spent the last 10 years going to conferences, going to different events, going to different meetups, and networking and building rapport with and connecting with all these different people. And now he's hosting his biggest event yet. And he has like over 200 people coming in from 20 different states here in my hometown. And it's like, I never knew that. I didn't know he spent this much time. I know he's been putting a lot of work in. I know he's been grinding, but there's so much that goes behind the scene. And until you get in a one-on-one and you don't have these genuine, deep, heart-to-heart conversations, you don't really ever get to see that dark side of things where it's like, man, it's been rough. So to kind of ask you a little bit, if you don't mind sharing, like, what was it like in your darkest times in your entrepreneurial journey when, it could be hard to be genuinely grateful, when it could be hard to be generous, right? Life throws some crazy haymakers at us sometimes. And when we're in the deepest parts and darkest parts of our valley, it could be hard to practice generosity, to practice gratitude, because we may be in question of like, why me? Why is this happening? Mm-hmm. Why am I going?
Great question. And I'll give you two things. The first one is there's a lady by the name of Amy Campbell. She's out of Chicago, And she has a quote. She's got a TED talk all about the giving mindset and generosity. And, it's one of the most powerful, moving things that you can ever experience. And she talks about, instead of thinking about what can I afford to give away, right? Like if you think about giving and generosity as like, I got to take care of myself. And if I don't solve all these issues, then there's no way that I could ever give anything to anyone else. You're thinking about it the wrong way. So instead of thinking, what can I afford to give away? You think about, what do I have that can help other people? And the answer to that is always something. I've never met anyone. I mean, I've worked with thousands of business owners over the years, and I've never had any person or any single one of them ever say that I have nothing that can help other people. And there's not I keep giving you twos. Maybe it's easy to understand, but there's two reasons for the first reason of your original question, or the first answer to the original question. And that is the business owner, they're driven, entrepreneurial, like change the world type of people. So it's like ingrained in them. They believe that they have something to give to the world. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a business. And then number two is when you work so hard for something, immediately you have something. Even if you don't have a product or a service that's good yet, or you don't have some, incredible or piece of intellectual property or something that you feel like it's tangible that you can hand to someone, you have experience. Like if you grind, like some of the greatest, most successful business owners, they do struggle a lot. And they have that to offer first because they can tell people what not to do, what it's like to struggle, where you should go, who you should hang out with. Even if they haven't achieved some amazing level of financial success or business success, they have something. So number one is, you got to consider that the moment you want to be an entrepreneur and you start taking action, you have something to give. I mean, it's absolutely true. And then the other thing to answer your original question is, when I was at my darkest times in my entrepreneurial journey, I knew the people I had to lean on. And part of the reason why I believe generosity and giving and kindness and working with other people in collaboration is so important, because it's definitely a two-way street. In fact, it's a three-way street because there's different parties that can benefit from this. So you're going to have tough times. I mean, even the greatest of entrepreneurs struggle a little bit. And my toughest time, people ask me, well, when you first got into the financial business, it's really hard to start off in that business. And the answer to that is true, but the hardest time is not right when you start, believe it or not. The hardest time is after you have some success and then trying to sustain the success and take that next step. And the entrepreneurial journey, it goes in waves. So the hardest time that I ever had was about 5 years into my career. It was tough when I first started, but it was harder 5 years in because I had some success and I had more complexity at this point. I had clients to service. I had people working under me. I had bosses working above me. I had all kinds of compliance issues to deal with. I had, things that I can't control, like the financial markets and the taxes and the Federal Reserve and different rules. So I would say gratitude is something about considering where you've come from. And that goes back to the comparison thing. Instead of comparing yourself, like you said, to someone in chapter 25, if you're in chapter 1 or 2, right? Compare yourself in chapter 2 to what you were like in chapter 1. And so when I was in my darkest time, about 5 years into my career, I remember someone telling me, they actually asked me to do a presentation. This is no lie. So I finally started having success in my business. I got asked to do this presentation. And then shortly after right before I got asked to do the presentation, things took a downturn. And I don't think they realized when I got asked to do this presentation, but I went to go speak in front of like 120 people at my company. And I had just experienced probably the worst period of time in my business. And so it proves that you never really know. An outside perception of what people are thinking can be completely inaccurate. You could be looking at someone that you think is having a lot of success, but behind the scenes, they're really having a rough time. So what I did was, in that moment when they asked me to do that, I went to one of my mentors and I said, hey, they're asking me to do this presentation, but I feel like I suck right now. And he's like, yeah, you feel like you suck, but you don't, because look back at this. And we went back over all the business plans and things that I have been doing for 5 years. And it reminded me that I've done a lot. I did a lot of work to get there. And so when I went out and did that presentation, and this is my first ever time doing this presentation, I was nervous. I didn't know what I was going to say. I went up there, I was prepared, but I went up there, being nervous and not knowing if I was going to hit it off. And I got like 6 emails after that event. And 2 of them were really nice, thanking me. And then 4 of them were talking about how it was a life-changing notes that I made for them. And I did talk a lot about looking back on where you've came from and using that for momentum for the future. So this is a really long-winded answer, but you got to make sure that you keep track of where you've come from. Never forget where you come from. And you've heard people say that before, and it's a cliche, but it's so true. It's good for the people in your life, but it's also really, really good for you to realize how much that you have to give.
Yeah, no, I love that. Don't compare yourself to other people's chapter 25. Compare your chapter 2 to your chapter 1. I love that. And I want to just repeat that so whoever's listening right now, whoever needs that can, really take that in. And I wanted to ask you, because I just came back from a conference. I've been running on like 4-hour nights of sleep for the past like week almost. So I'm literally shocked, but I love these conversations. And one of the things I noticed that during the conference is that I have massive imposter syndrome, and I never really realized it until literally a couple days ago from the day we're recording this now. And I'm always in this mindset of like, as soon as one task is done, I have to instantly go on to the next task. I'm not doing enough yet. I haven't done enough yet. I haven't accomplished enough yet. I haven't, I'm not going as hard as I could be or should be or need to be. And I forget I'm 21, so there's also that part of it. But it's also like, man, like at this conference, a lot of people that were there we know each other personally. It's like a big like real estate personal development conference that I just went to, like 300 or so people, a lot more intimate than most big conferences. So the community of people, we know, a lot of us know each other already going in. And all these people are like, John, like, I teach social media classes to them. And they're like, John, oh my goodness, thank you so much. I love your classes. You're doing so amazing. And in the back of my head, there's always this little thing like, man, I'm still struggling to make ends meet. Like there's still more bills right now than there is months to, keep at the end of the month. And so it's like, man, I'm just barely hanging on by a thread. But everyone is like, and it took me a couple like walks to myself to really realize like what I had this entire time was imposter syndrome and this feeling of not having done enough. So let me ask you, for whoever's listening right now that might be going through that exact same experience that I'm currently just realized, like how does one overcome that?
Well, the number one thing is reps. I mean, the more work you put in towards it, the more time you put in towards something, the more confident the mind becomes. Because first of all, I don't know if you ever heard this quote, but confidence is success remembered. So, and confidence is generally the opposite of imposter syndrome, or imposter syndrome is at least a form of underconfidence. And it's been proven that imposter syndrome develops from a false sense or a false sense of direction, right? It's not actually that you're incapable of performing whatever you're doing. I mean, you're at a conference teaching people about social media. They're telling you that you're doing well. You go to the conference, you network with people, you've had some success. So it's clear that it's not that you are an imposter, but there's a false sense of direction. You're associating your success with some kind of metric or something else, or the amount of bills that you have to pay. There's certain things that are out of your control that shouldn't be your direction. And so imposter syndrome is a false sense of direction. And I find myself doing that sometimes myself. I have to get back on track all the time. I mean, I'm running my core business, and then I'm also speaking to organizations about building a generous culture. So I have 2 things going on, and I have a tendency to mix up the metrics and the goals and start thinking, one thing's more important than the other. And what happens is I do the same exact thing. I'll be in a scenario in my primary business, right? And I'll associate it with one of the levels or one of the metrics that I use to measure success in my speaking business. And because I'm so used to it, my brain is so used to that, I'll get distracted and I'll say, you know what? Not enough people have seen my content related to my company, Initiate Impact. And then I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll say, you know what? But that's not one of my primary goals of Initiate Impact. My primary goals are this, 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 and this. And I remind myself that why I'm here to do that. And you talk about 4 hours of sleep and going hard and working. I will never tell anyone not to work hard, because I think that's where the vast majority of people find their success, is when you find something that you're really good at, you like doing, and you work hard. You got to work hard. However, time blocking and scheduling are extremely important. And if you schedule your time well, and you know your time frames, like when you're best at deep work and how much cognitive load your brain can handle, you'll be way, way more successful in life, and you'll avoid imposter syndrome. I'm telling you, it's highly related, because I know that if I work on something for more than 4 hours, I begin to start thinking I'm unsuccessful because I feel like I haven't made enough progress, and your quality of output slows down. So if you know your ideal, for most people I've learned, is about 4 hours a day where they can put in like deep, hard work. So I'm just going to use that as a general example. You might be 6 hours, someone else might be 2, or it might depend on your health or where you're at in life, but let's just use 4 hours. I know that for 4 hours, I'm at peak output. And I think, man, I can look back on that 4 hours and say, man, I was doing really good. But then if I go over that 4 hour time frame, my quality of work severely drops. And then I start feeling like I'm unproductive or I'm not good. My brain gets foggy. And then imposter syndrome can start seeping in. Even though a couple hours before that, in the middle of my 4 hour window, I was feeling fired up. I was like, man, I can conquer the world. I can take on anyone. But it'll start dropping when you're out of that primary work zone. So you want to schedule your time really well. You want to put the hardest, most important tasks in that deep work state so that you don't have imposter syndrome related to that, or what I might call directional drift, like I was just saying before. Imposter syndrome is generally you're in the wrong path. So scheduling, timing, knowing when your brain is best at what it wants to do is great. Now, I talked about the story earlier when I thought I was an invincible 18-year-old. That was part of it. I thought I could just, whenever I want to, 24 hours a day, I could wake up in the middle of the night and work really hard at something and be successful. And then come to find out that's not truly the case. But you want to make sure that you have your time locked out well and get some sleep, man. 4 hours a night. Occasionally you can do that, but you want to make sure that you're well rested.
Definitely. After this, man, I'm going to watch a couple episodes of my favorite shows and clock out for the rest of the day. I still have a lot of day left, so I'm just going to take the rest of the day off and take some time for myself, because it's definitely catching up on me. But you mentioned too, back to, when you were 18 and feeling invincible. Fast forward a little bit. When did it start to change? When did it start to... you start to transform and get away from that, I believe I can conquer the world and do it all at the same time, whenever I want, however I want, because, I'm 18 and I'm like just a super workhorse. When did that start to change for you? And what was that process like? What was that?
Yeah, so I went off to college when I was 18, like most people might do. And I went from South Florida up to New York to go to college. And I was playing football, going to get an education. And a lot of my family is from up that way. And I thought, man, that'd be cool. Like, an opportunity to do all three of those things: spend some time with the family, play ball, and hopefully get an education. I think my parents probably thought that was higher on the list than it really was. But I did that. And then in a short period of time, I was in training camp playing football, and I thought what I had was a groin injury. And one thing led to another. And I was doing this training exercise, this rehab exercise once, and my trainer called me out, and he basically called me a weakling in front of the whole team, players and coaches. And this stupid exercise that I was doing, and I looked like an idiot probably, and it was embarrassing, but he called me out, called me a weakling. I was like, listen, Rick, something's wrong, man. Like it's been a week and a half and I'm rehabbing a super groin injury. Now, I don't know if anyone's pulled a groin out there, but man, that injury is horrible because you can't stand, twist, no less run down a football field. So one thing led to another. I went through all these tests, and my parents were coming up for my first game. And this was supposed to be what I thought was my last test. And the doctor calls me to the office. Typically, I'm in these appointments for like hours on end. I was in there for maybe a minute. And he walks into the office and sits me down and goes, and they called me Bobby back then. He said, Bobby, got your results from all the tests. You have cancer. And I said, what? I have cancer. Like, I'm 18 years old. I'm invincible. I'm playing ball. Like, put me back. Let me go put my pads on and run out there and practice. And I was in shock, man. So I walked out of the building, and the timing was like impeccable. My parents expected me to be in my appointment still, but they had just landed in New York to come see me. And they had been planning this trip for a while. Obviously, they knew that things were different now, but they knew something was wrong. And my mom's like, hey, I didn't expect you to answer the phone. How'd the appointment go? And I was like, yeah, Ma, about the appointment. And I had to tell her, obviously. And I could just feel, John, like I could just feel the air get pulled out of the car that they were in. The only thing I could hear, my mom was like screaming, although she was dead silent, but the only thing I could hear was my dad. My dad was like, Susan, like, what's wrong? And obviously she told him too. And so we met back at my uncle's house up in New York there. And I hadn't seen them in months, the longest I had ever been away from home. I remember, only child, mama's boy, and, and I gave, we said some prayers, shed some tears, gave my parents a big hug, and we were like, what do we do? And so I tell you this because my uncle's best friend came over to his house a couple of days later on Saturday, and we had never met this guy. We're from Florida. He's up in New York. And he came over to the house and he introduces himself to my parents and I, and he pulls his keys out of his pocket and he hands his keys to my parents. And he said, Bob and Susan, I can't imagine what you're going through with your son right now. Take my car for as long as you need it. And they were blown away. They're like, what? Your car? And he was there for maybe 15 minutes and he left. Say goodbye to my aunt and uncle, was gone. And we're like, whoa, like that's the nicest thing someone's ever done for us. Like he just pretty much gave us his car for as long as we need it. So the following week, we had to go to some doctor's appointments. And it was Tuesday morning. It was my second ever college class. So I had just started school. My oncologist, my cancer doctor at this point had advised me not to drop my classes. I came out of my first or second ever class and I'm sitting in the cafeteria watching the news. I don't know the news station. I don't watch the news. I'm not from New York, but they got this old school TV hanging on a bracket on the wall. And I'm watching the news in New York, and all of a sudden there's a plane hits one of the Twin Towers in downtown New York. And I was like, whoa, that's a horrible accident. So I call my dad and he's like, hey, you watching the news? I'm like, yeah. And all of a sudden another plane hits the other tower. And we realized it was the September 11th terrorist attacks. So I hopped in the car. My dad's like, you better get back here to the house. So I hopped in the car, left my food on the counter. It's probably still sitting there. And 20 years later, and I hopped in the car. It took me 9 hours, which was typically a 15-minute drive from school to my uncle's house. And I ran out of gas. Now, this whole time I'm listening to AM radio, and I will never listen to 9 hours of AM radio. If anyone is listening has ever actually listened to AM radio, it's a thing, believe it or not. And I'll never do that again, but it was riveting. I mean, I listened to all of the September 11th coverage, and I'm burning towers in the background because I'm in New York. I ran out of gas in my uncle's neighborhood. We pushed my car into his driveway, and my parents and I looked at each other. And like a couple weeks ago, I thought I was this invincible 18-year-old. And now I don't know if my life's coming to an end because of my illness, and the world might be coming to an end with these terrorist attacks. And we looked at each other and were like, what is going on? And so my aunt was frantic because she couldn't get a hold of my uncle, and he was on business the night before in Denver. He finally called at like 8:00 at night. We realized that he's okay. He was supposed to fly back to New York in the morning. He's like, hey guys, I know you, the phones have been out. Sorry, but I'm okay. I'm alive. And we were going to hang up. We're like, thank God he's okay. But he's like, hey, before I let you know, my buddy Tim, who you met a couple of days ago, he was in the towers this morning and he died. And we were like, what? Like, that's crazy. This guy did the nicest thing in the world, and he did not deserve to die. And it turns out, John, that Tim was like a super generous dude. Like, he used to do stuff like this all the time. He worked for an investment bank. Talk about entrepreneurial business guy. Like, man, you'd love to have him on the podcast if he was still around. But the whole company at Cantor Fitzgerald was super generous people. In fact, they donated office space to my uncle's foundation for cystic fibrosis. Like, they were just known for being really nice people. And Tim said that Tim would say something like this. Most people will say, live your life to the fullest. You never know when you don't have an opportunity anymore. Like, take risks, do stuff fun. But Tim would say, you never know when your last opportunity to be generous is. So take every chance you get. And little did we know that his last opportunity to be generous was an opportunity to bless our family. And it hit me. You asked a question, like, what did it change? Like, what was the turning point? It didn't happen immediately. Like, I didn't overnight suddenly become this generous person who felt like I cared like for other people. But that was the time in my life where it clicked. And it's been a journey since. So you never know when your last opportunity to support someone else is. So I try to do that as much as I can in my life.
Man, that's such a powerful story. And so it's something that where, I mean, I could only imagine what it would be like to experience that. Because for me, one, I never had cancer, but two, it's like you have a terminal disease, right? You just started college. Your sport that you loved and were going to play is now being pulled from underneath you. in a heartbeat, right? And now the whole world is pretty much shutting down because the attacks. And the guy who just blessed your family passed away all within the time frame. What was this, like a couple weeks almost?
5 days. Thursday, the 6th of September, 2001. And then the attacks were 5 days later on the 11th.
That is crazy. And it's such a small world because the Cantor Fitzgerald is also where I had my first internship. And
Really?
Yeah. So I know the chief marketing officer over at the Cantor. And
that's cool.
It's something where it's like, man, they from what I know during my short time there, they did have helped a ton. That was my first internship, and that's where I found my love and appreciation for marketing, and so that's where it came from. But to go back to your story a little bit, so now you have the transformation. Now fast forward a little bit more, take us a little further on the journey. Now you're teaching other people, other companies, other corporations, other organizations about this idea and concept of generosity and, gratitude and giving back. And why do most people suffer with like selfishness? Why is that something? Like, is it like conditioned within us? Like, why are so many people so self-centered?
So if you've ever heard of the concept nature versus nurture.
Yes.
I believe that humans, actually it's more than a belief. There's scientific proof on this. I'll reference another TED Talk by a lady, a friend of mine, actually been on my podcast, really nice lady. Her name is Wendy Steele. She founded an organization called Impact 100 Global. Check it out. The work, especially if you're a young lady, awesome organization to get involved in. But she has a TED Talk. It's probably 12 years old, but it still holds up. It's all about the hormones and the science behind why the human mind appreciates generosity. And she talks about there being three parties: the giver, the receiver, and the third party onlooker. Now, we all know what it's like to receive a gift. It feels good, right? You get a gift. Oh, the person loves me. They care about me, and I'm going to use a gift. We also know what it's like to give a gift. It feels really good to give one too, to bless someone, make them feel happy. Like it probably made Tim feel really good when he gave his keys to my parents. But also the third party onlooker, it's also been proven that they experience the same hormones, oxytocin being one of them, the same bonding hormones that the other two parties receive. And so it's so important to understand that. So I believe that strongly. And so I've proven it scientifically, or Wendy proved it scientifically for me. So check that out. But in my other research that I've done related to business, we talk about entrepreneurialism. Giving and having a generous culture is not just for good feels, right? It's good business. People want to do business with organizations that are giving and care about their customers and their employees. And if someday you rise from an employee to a leader, manager, or maybe you start a business of your own, you want to have a generous culture inside your organization because you're going to attract the best talent. And people are going to want to stay with your organization because they feel like they're appreciated. And the person in the cubicle next to them doesn't feel like they need to take you out to reach the next level of their career. It's a collaborative process. And so when we talk about giving, now I work in the financial space. So a lot of the giving that I get to talk about is with money and saving taxes and charitable donations and philanthropy. And don't get me wrong, John, those things are awesome. Like those are really important. We can change the world with our financial gifts. And a lot of people do. But it's not just about the money. It's about the mindset. Generosity is not an event. And you have to understand that. I tell corporations and businesses this all the time. Events are nice. Event is a celebration of success. Or maybe it's an award that you won, or it's a birthday or a holiday, right? And events are cool, but those are not generosity. Those are specifically events. Just because I won an award doesn't mean I'm a generous person, or the person that gave me the award is generous, right? Or just because there's a holiday doesn't mean we're not. And just because I give my gifts to my family because I'm supposed to on Christmas or whatever the holiday I celebrate during the winter months there, it doesn't matter. What matters is the mindset, like if you actually give. And that's why it doesn't matter how much money you have or how many resources you have. That's not a measure of how giving you could be. So organizations that have a generous culture, they attract the best talent, and then they attract loyal customers. Like when you start a business, your first reaction is going to be, man, I don't care. As long as they can talk and breathe, I'm going to accept them as a customer because I want to make money. And it makes sense in the early going in a career or a business. But you'll get to a point where you'll realize what's more valuable are the most loyal customers, the ones that are going to be your cheerleaders, the ones that are going to care for you, the ones that love it when you pick up the phone and call them, right? The first half of my career, a lot of the phone calls I had to make were to people that were like, oh no, Bob's calling. What's the problem? Like, what's going wrong with my financial picture? Or did my account lose 50% this month or whatever? Now my client, we use the term partners because we partner with people in their mission. But anyway, so if one of our partners calls us, or I call them, they're like, oh, Bob, it's great to hear from you. What's the good news? And that's the relationship that you want with people you do business with. So your question was poignant because I think companies, they get in this mindset. You talked about earlier, you mentioned like, how do we get out of this selfishness mindset? And the reason why we have this mindset is because the world tells us that we got to have things now. And you got to read another self-help book. You got to listen to another podcast. You got to practice all these different things to make yourself better at what you do. And what I found is we need a lot less of that. I had a guy by the name of Robert Leopold on my podcast once, and he said he calls the self-help industry, he renamed it the shelf help industry because the data shows that most people buy all these books, maybe read them once, usually don't even read them. But even if they read them, they probably only read them once, and then it goes back on the shelf and it never actually helps. And so my theory is that we need less self-help books and courses and social media, ads, whatever it is. We need less of that and more collaboration and giving with other people. And that will grow a radically generous and radically growing organization if you have that mindset. So really important. The way that you avoid selfishness is not to pretend that you want to give people stuff, hoping you get something in return. It's actually to ignore 90% of all those messages that tell you that you're not good enough and sit down and come up with your own definition of success and include other people in that process.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. And it's something that's so needed. And you talk about your customers being afraid to hear from you, not being afraid, but being like, oh man, it's Bob calling again. But it's like, and then that going to transform into, and now them being partners. And people don't understand how much words mean and how impactful words can be in how important your usage of words is. Because when you look at people as customers, they're just people that buy your product or service. But as you mentioned, when you look at them as partner, now it's like we're in this together. We're helping each other. And it's like, it's coming from a whole different place of a whole different frame around doing business with people and collaborating. And it reminds me of the old African adage, proverb, go fast, go alone, go far, go together type of thing. And it's like including other people in the success, man. You dropped a lot of amazing nuggets. Your storytelling is amazing. Where can we connect with you, Bob? You mentioned your podcast. I know you have a book. Where can we find you at? Where can we get more, Bob, if we wanted to do so?
BobDepasquale.com, best place there. My company's initiateimpact.com, or you can hit me up. DMs are open, Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram at B.
Amazing. Now it's time for our famous 5 questions for that. I'm curious to see what your answers are going to be because you have tons of amazing nuggets. So let's get right into it. Question number 1, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Most impactful lesson I learned in life is that you can never give up on learning. You can give up on something that's not going well. You can give up on a project. You can give up on even a book that you don't like. But learning in general, if you give up on learning in one area, start learning somewhere else. Never give up on that progress.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
Integrity.
If you had to change someone's life with one book, which book would you recommend?
Oh, well, first choice for me is the Bible. I'm a faithful guy. I'd also say there's a book called The 12-Week Year if you're looking for business and goal-setting success.
What is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I want generosity to be cool again. I think it was at one point, but we're now.
And for anyone that wanted to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step that you would recommend?
Having a budget. I mentioned earlier, counseled thousands of families on their finances. I know more families that have a wealthy feel and mindset that have an extremely modest budget, modest income because they know they're fine. They have a great relationship with their money and they have a solid budget. And I know a lot of people that make 6, 7, 8 figures, in some cases 9 figures, but yeah, they have some fancy stuff, but their budget is crap and they're not wealthy. So it's all about the first step is knowing how much money you have coming in and going out. And you mentioned earlier, I'll give you a lot of credit. You said the bills might be piling up and you're trying to get the income. You're in way better shape than someone making $100,000
who has no clue what's going on. And there's a lot of people out there. So get the budget in order first. Do the math.
Amazing, Bob. Thanks again for hopping on, man. It was a pleasure having you on and hearing your story, hearing how you overcame a lot of the things you had to overcome and the lessons you learned from those experiences. So thanks again, brother.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.